You are listening to No PC Allowed, aka No Political Correctness Allowed, and I am Mac Iverson. Instead of going into the latest race-baiting police or ICE incident, let's examine the larger issue looming behind all these overblown accusations of racism. Even though the murder of George Floyd occurred way back in 2020, it's more relevant today than ever because we still have not learned our lesson from his murder. Who is actually at fault in any death by police incident is always case by case, but the George Floyd murder clearly had nothing to do with race, and that's safe to say regarding probably all such deaths over the last several decades. And even though I'm very conservative, I'm not going to tumble down the foolish rabbit hole of saying something so spectacularly inane that the main perpetrator of George Floyd's murder, that being Officer Derek Chauvin, was not guilty. Many conservatives, whom I have a certain degree of respect for, such as Ben Shapiro, have made this huge miscalculation. But to assert that Chauvin is not guilty is a blatant slap in the face of common sense. So what is this major lesson that we never quite learned the first time, with the very first race riots stemming from excessive use of police force in America? We will examine that. But even worse than American race paranoia is the drug-induced paranoia of the victims. Most of these violent deaths seem to involve drugs in some capacity, or the need for these sad souls to escape the rigors of life. But who's responsible for the deaths? Well, first and foremost, we are responsible for our own messes that we create ourselves. But beyond that, look at the increasing extraordinary stressors in the lives of just normal people like you and me throughout America. The George and Alex Soros crime machine is behind these stressors more than anyone or anything else. But first, here's a quick recap of some of the major bullet points that most Americans are still unaware of because the mafia-controlled media won't report them because they've been bought off by the George and Alex Soros mafia money machine. Most of these points seem to point to Mr. Floyd being fully responsible for all the bad that came to him and the entire country on that especially memorable Memorial Day in 2020. But the final verdict of guilt does not go to Mr. Floyd, nor even Officer Chauvin. Rather, it goes to a far more nefarious player, as we shall soon see. First of all, Mr. Floyd swallowed a lot of pills that he was trying to hide, not only just before he died, but also at another traffic stop a year earlier in 2019. He swallowed enough pills to turn Mr. Floyd quite pink. Now let's stop right there. Anyone who is reckless enough to swallow dangerous drugs to avoid detection has absolutely no concern for his own health and welfare. In other words, we're dealing with a complete and total idiot. Big surprise. Therefore, the cops treated him as one. However, and this is a huge however, there is a fascinating fact about that first traffic stop in 2019 that deserves our laser beam focus for just a moment. That officer did not feel the need to yank Mr. Floyd out of his vehicle and jam him into a police car like a gangster trying to stuff a 400-pound carcass into the back of one of those dumb smart cars. Next, I'm gonna fit him into a nice pair of concrete shoes, and we're gonna take a nice little drive down to the Hudson River. But that's exactly what the Minneapolis police did to Mr. Floyd, and he wasn't even dead yet. The autopsy report showed that George had a fatal dose of fentanyl under any circumstances in his system. So it was only a matter of time before that reckless fool died anyway. You could literally count the grains of sand left in his hourglass. He was like a loser living on borrowed time from a loan shark. Regarding the incident, he was saying, "I can't breathe," long before he ever had Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck. That's because he was being manhandled like a sack of potatoes, and when a man is as mentally sick, paranoid, and is hopped up on as many pills as he was, any professional policeman should know that to beat up on someone with such a drug-induced paranoia is obviously playing with fire, and especially when there are so many video recording witnesses just a few feet away. Well, anyone with a lick of common sense would know that getting extremely forceful with poor old George should not be the way to proceed. The results of the autopsy showed that if he had been found at home with these drugs and with these dosages, that would easily pass as an overdose. Any of the bruising to his neck or anywhere else was not even remotely capable of killing a healthy man. But a druggie with an enlarged heart was easily killed that day. It has been rumored that Officer Chauvin is writing a book with the working title of By the Book. The mere title shows you how dangerously naive he is. To be a police officer in the year 2020 and to obviously not understand the extreme risk that he was forcing onto not just himself and his family, but the entire country. During his sentencing to 21 years in prison, He had this deer in the headlamps look on his face, like he couldn't understand how he was trained a certain way to use what is called the knee-to-neck maneuver, and use it by the book, no less. And then he would still be hung out to dry to be the whipping boy martyr for the entire crooked state of Minnesota. But only a fool like Chauvin could be thinking that just because he's doing something by the book, that he's not going to spend many, many years in prison as a result of this old fool George Floyd dying under his watch and under his knee. Now, technically, he was spot on. He was trained to do this maneuver. But his crooked bosses, specifically the chief of police, Madaria Arredondo, did not have his back. He even lied that he was not even aware this maneuver was used in his department, even though all cops interviewed said that it was a well-known and practiced procedure. Officer Chauvin was thrown to the wolves as a scapegoat to try and hide the corruption of a multitude of race-baiting guilty players, and that's just in Minnesota. I was impressed by how much research was done in the making of a movie about this trial called The Fall of Minneapolis. However, if you saw that movie, did you notice that the worst, most gut-wrenching 9 minutes of Floyd's murder was not shown? Those few desperate minutes that set the country on fire were not even shown in this movie. A documentary that at least was pretending to be objective? It was left out because for the viewer to not be affected by those 9 minutes would make you non-human. I am an independent conservative, and I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid announcing like a bloody fool, as so many other conservatives have, that Chauvin and the other police officers were not guilty. They were obviously guilty. Even though they followed the book, they were guilty of reckless, stupid disregard of common sense and human life. Chauvin was on Floyd's neck way too long, or at least with too much pressure. Any 3-year-old could have told him that. It's downright eerie. It's like none of those 4, all grown-ups mind you, were even aware of what's going on in the world with all the previous race riots, too many of which were based on fake police brutality charges. But this one was real. If there is one trait I cannot stand in a grown-up, it is naivete. I hate that trait even in children unless they're 3 or 4 years old, then it's kind of cute. But in the world we live in today, even children 5 and 6 years old should not be naive as to the potential evil that surrounds them. Look no further than the LGBT WTF mafia, which is controlled by vicious, sick, and twisted, evil, child-molesting perverts. Children need to be aware of this, but today many of their parents aren't even aware of it. They believe that the LGBT WTF madness is just another lifestyle choice. This is pure evil, stupid insanity. I also noticed something quite fascinating about this documentary. So much time and attention was provided like an expert defense attorney to many bullet points. But George Soros' name, the other George, was not even mentioned. The infamous criminal gang of George and Alex Soros' crime family, which is far and away most responsible for all of this garbage going on in the United States with the false cries of police brutality and even more obvious stupid lies of racism, are all brought to us by these mobsters with millions of dollars in soft and hard money payoffs, and not one mention in this documentary goes to them. The makers of this film are hyper-focused on the details, but they're not hyper-focused on the puppet masters who are behind all the details. And that's simply an amazing oversight. There is no conspiracy theory. Anyone who does not know about the harms that the Soros crime family has brought to America, throughout the entire Western world actually, is naive beyond belief, and I hate naive people. Speaking of naive, Derek Chauvin got 21 years and the other 3 officers got an average of about 3 years in prison for their sociopathic naivete. And George Floyd's family received a $27 million judgment. Do you know how much money a veteran's family receives when a hero dies in combat? $100,000. Mr. Floyd's family gets rewarded by becoming fantastically wealthy because George Floyd, in his public life, did everything grotesquely wrong. He was the opposite of a hero. He was the opposite of a martyr. He was just a fantastic idiot. All that money, by the way, does not come from the pockets of all those directly responsible corrupted officials who have run Minnesota into the ground, or those who accepted the rule of knee to neck but then turned a blind eye towards those 4 officers. And because they condoned the rules, of course, they were responsible for the rules. But oh no, they don't pay out the money, but rather the money comes from people like you and me, innocent taxpayer suckers who work for a living. But we are forced to hand it over as hush money to the undeserving George Floyd family, who are now fat and happy because they got just enough shut-yo-mouth money And so they don't feel the need to go after the real guilty players, or even the mid-range nefarious players like Minnesota Governor Timmy the Tampon Walz, or the effeminate Mayor Jacob Fry, or the then Chief of Police Madaria Arredondo, or the Assistant Chief of Police and all the department chiefs or the City Council, all compromised, all liars. By the way, Mayor Jacob Fry was on his knees shaking and pretending to cry over Floyd's casket. Oh, he may have been crying, but it was still highly manipulative. Only a flaming idiot could fall for this Machiavellian stunt. The mayor was also signing settlements for the family in the middle of the trial. Again, these race-baiting posers are the real enemies within, responsible for Floyd's murder, not just the incompetent scapegoat police officers on scene. A bit higher up the ladder of corruption are the puppets of the Soros crime family, that being the outrageously corrupted BLM Incorporated and the out-of-the-closet fascist organization known as Anti-Fa, all inventions of Soros and his proxies. China is a major instigator and benefactor as well. These are all enemies within. This is the rot within the USA that Abraham Lincoln warned us about. He said America cannot be conquered from overseas. That rot will occur within our borders. And he knew better than anyone, having fought and defeated the South in the Civil War. Many will say that these people are untouchables, and of course that's always going to be true until we simply and directly say they are no longer untouchable. Look at Adolf Hitler, for example. He did many nefarious things which led to World War II, and yet none of his detractors did anything substantial against him until he invaded Poland, which officially started World War II. Charlie Kirk said, and I strongly disagree, that just because we disagree with Soros, that doesn't mean we can indict him on what we disagree with. But was every single thing that Hitler did prior to his invasion of Poland blatantly illegal? Much of it was. But within his own country, Hitler simply unilaterally declared the illegal to be illegal, and vice versa. You see, if you throw enough promises of big money around and soft threats towards those who refuse to cooperate, everyone eventually starts to look the other way. This is how you lose your freedom and your country. Just look at Al Capone. He did many things that were illegal, but when many of the enforcers of the laws have been bought off, then all the law-breaking in the world could not force Capone to ever be stopped. He even started to look like a respectable businessman, just like George Soros. Capone also cheated on his taxes all his professional mobster life. It was always illegal, but arresting him on tax evasion was only used as a last resort when nothing else worked against him. Al Capone bought off everyone he could, but tax evasion was something he could not buy off because there was so much money that was owed to other people. All his bribes were relatively small time, but when you try to cheat Uncle Sam out of his take, then the kindly uncle will start to get mean and bring the full force of law against Capone, who was trying to scam the one who was losing out on the biggest amount of money. Again, that being Uncle Sam. Never mind that it was all criminal money covered in blood. It's all about money. Big, massive money drives all this insanity. Likewise, people do not walk locked in goose step with Soros's sick agenda unless they're strongly compelled to do so. Happy, well-adjusted people do not act woke unless they are rewarded. For example, no big money means no transsexual insanity. It wouldn't even exist today. Transsexualism has nothing to do with ideals. Look at Portland and Seattle in 2020. Many of those virtuous protesters for democracy were pillagers who were paid and organized by the Soros crime machine. The street crooks didn't give a rip about some loser named George Floyd. They loved that it happened. His crumpled, idiot throwaway life was merely the useful kindling for long-term riots. The burning of those wasted wasteland cities, all for the advancement of dirty, deep state billionaires. And plenty of pizza, pot, and beer money for the street people who took part. And look what's going on today with these idiotic protests against Trump. These so-called no crowns, no king protests, which are just stupid. But getting back to Portland and Seattle, the Floyd-Palooza race riots, and especially those two cities, and with very few arrests, gave the January 6th election integrity patriot protesters all the confidence in the world that they were doing the right thing when they strode up to the Capitol with gusto on that fateful day to protest the obvious and grotesque election fraud that cheated President Trump out of his second term in 2020. We now know that possibly up to 20 million fake votes were illegally cast for Vice President Brandon. This told us everything about how deeply corrupt the deep state was and still is, obviously. Again, these gangsters will always be viewed as unreachable or untouchable by the law, always, until we say they are untouchable no more. That is a matter of pure political will. If no one had the guts to say that Hitler's gassing of 6 million Jews was wrong, then there would be no punishment for it. There would have been no Nuremberg trials. Likewise, today, if no one has the guts to say that members of the Soros gang deserves death penalties for the massive harms that they have unleashed upon Western civilization, then George Soros can simply continue to read his newspaper on his park bench in Central Park. No problem. He has no fear because his massive bribes have tranquilized and put to sleep the American conscience. The best you can say about any of these George Soros stooges, all these smaller players in Minnesota, is that they are all scared to death cowards. That's the best you can say about them. They know they will be targeted mercilessly by the mafia-controlled deep state if they try to do the right thing. So their entire careers are based on intentional lies. They made the wrong choice in life when they decided to become demon rat Democrats who would run cover for the Soros money machine, of which they have greatly benefited. In fact, they wouldn't be in office if it weren't for George Soros' dirty money putting them there. It's not necessarily direct from Soros because that's not how mobsters operate. They have shell companies, or air quotes, non-profits, to hide their influence as much as possible. But all of his money is traceable to local Minnesota politics and to every other state in the USA. The ultimate goal is to replace police professionals, many hundreds of whom quit shortly after Floydapalooza in the Minneapolis PD alone. They got the hell out of Dodge. The idea is to replace professionals with woke, politically correct a-holes who will do the bidding of their deep state tyrant bosses, which is to round up and arrest people like you and me eventually. That is their long game. Don't believe me? Study another flaming a-hole, Saul Alinsky, in his book Rules for Radicals, the proven how-to book on how to bring down the USA. Many still insist that these cops are innocent. Okay then, since this knee-to-neck maneuver was department approved and taught, then let these 4 cops out of prison and put their CY a-hole bosses in their place. They all deserve Chauvin's 21 years in prison for this transparently obvious cover-up of department incompetence and for making him the fall guy and for the burning of America's cities as a result. The dangerously idiotic and fascistic defund the police movement also came from this. All Soros's doing. Always remember this. The Soros crime syndicate and all their proxies have the blood of millions of Americans on their filthy hands. Be sure to like us, give us 5 stars, write a review, and share. Please do it now while it's fresh in your mind. You've been listening to No PC Allowed. I am Mac Iverson.